By now you're familiar with Paul House, professor of Old Testament at Beeson Divinity School. He's given us a general introduction to prophetic literature from the minor prophets. In this next instruction, he's going to give us a method in dealing with one minor prophet well. He's going to use the book of Amos.
There are gospel themes in Joel and Amos. Since I believe gospel means declaration, I believe the whole Bible is God's declaration of redemption. The heart of it is Jesus Christ in 1 Corinthians 15, but we would not even know what Christ meant without the whole. The whole Bible is gospel-focused, gospel-driven. I don't have to find the gospel somewhere as if it doesn't belong there. It isn't there already. There is this gospel sweep from creation to new creation throughout it in the prophets. The Bible teaches that God is the creator and ruler of nature and nations. This is where the Bible begins. This is what the new creation reminds us of. Amos stresses this 3 times. The creator is the one who's judging. Those 3 passages in Amos, very clear. Ruler of nature. He didn't create it and let it run. He manages it. Read Joel 1. Here is a locust plague. God is behind it. Or read Amos 4, 6 to 13. I sent these different so-called natural disasters, yet you did not return to me. God was in control of that. God never ducks the issue that He is a ruler of nature and the ruler of nations, according to Joel 1, and certainly Amos 1, 3 to 2, 3, and on into Amos 2:16. God made these nations, He rules them. Remember the covenant with Noah. So here's where we start. Who do we have to deal with in the prophetic literature? Who are the prophets always calling us and everyone to deal with? It is the God who created, sustains, and rules. Now, God is the judge of the wicked, and the great concept of this is the day of the Lord. And you see this in Joel 1, 15 to 20, 2, 1 through 11, and then all through Amos, but I'll pick Amos 5, 18 to 27, where there's people who are wanting the day of the Lord and they don't seem to realize they're in trouble on the day of the Lord. Now, this is who we have to deal with, and this is the problem. You're starting to wonder, if you ever wonder where the Apostle Paul got his great ideas, he probably would have said, you ever read Amos? You ever read the prophets? The good news is that God is the relational, compassionate, covenant-making God, Exodus 34, 6 and 7, but He won't clear the guilty. We see this in Joel 2, 12 and following. You see it in Amos 9, 11 to 15, and even in chapter 4 of Amos, yet you did not return to me, indicates you could have returned to me. I'd take you back, even after all this. And remember, Joel and Amos follow the book of Hosea. And if God will take Gomer and Israel back, even if it makes him look weak, He will take sinners back. Extraordinary forgiveness. But He holds the world accountable. Kind of running out of space here. God's relational, compassionate, but will not clear the guilty. He holds the world accountable through the Noah covenant. He shows kindness to the world by sending His priestly people Israel with His message to the world through His covenant with Abraham and through Moses. He offers the world covenant renewal and victory through David's covenant. And He's offered His Son as the founder of a new covenant that incorporates all covenants, offering grace to the people. So, God is not just a judge, He is a healer, a restorer. but he's willing to be a judge. And it's in these books. It's in these books. That's where they're headed. God will restore and heal. So, okay, you don't have to worry that these books are law versus gospel, or that it's judgment against restoration. They've got the whole picture. It's the biblical pattern. So with that in mind, let's turn a bit to Amos. What do we need to know that might help us interpret Amos, soak ourselves in his context, so we'll have some idea when he says certain things, a bit what he's talking about. In 1:1, we are told these are the words of Amos, who was among the shepherds. And you need to get out of your mind, out of your people's mind, all this talk about shepherds being lowly, scoundrel folk. That shepherd was the word the kings used for themselves in the ancient world. I'm the people's shepherd. It was an honorific term. And he could have, that word may well mean that he was a sheep breeder. He had a big business, because wool business was massive at this point in time. Of Tekoa, which was a city in Judah near Israel. In the days of Uzziah, king of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake. Here are some things that are going to be very important for you. Remember 2000 BC, that's Abraham, right? I just use some basic dates over and over with people so they can start rolling through it. And I know you can argue all these dates in different ways. So I've chosen one, kind of hit a middle ground. I do the early date for Moses and the Exodus, 1450 to 1400. I have the conquest, roughly this time. Again, these are rounded figures. 1350, 1050, time of the judges. Now then, 1050 to 930, that's the united monarchy, the united kingdom. Israel was only ever all 12 tribes under one king for that length of time. That's it. 3 kings conveniently served 40 years each. Either a quirk of history, which they do happen, or the way the Bible says they had a good and full reign, but 40 years each. Saul, David, Solomon. 40 years each. So 1050, 1010, 1010, 970, 970, 930. Solomon dies in 930. And my next date is 722. This is the time period in which northern Israel existed as its own nation. 930 to 587 is a length of time southern Israel, which the Bible calls Judah, existed. Now, as you well know, your folks have been galloping along reading their Bible daily, and Israel means all 12 tribes, and it means this family that's become a nation under a king. But then, in 930, the kingdom divides into 2 parts. This one, which is always called Israel thereafter. A bit confusing for folks. 10 tribes in the north, where the best growing land was, the best agricultural land, so the most money in that culture. This Judah, David's tribe, and Benjamin were the only 2 tribes of this little bitty kingdom then. In the south, more arid, less money, 2 kingdoms. Now, let's go back and look at 1 Kings 12, 25 to 33, because you have 2 kingdoms now. You have 2 kingships. And we're about to see how the very first king of Israel, named Jeroboam the first, we're going to be dealing with Jeroboam the second in a moment, but Jeroboam the first was king of Israel. Do you remember that God made him king? Because of Solomon's idolatry, God decided to divide the kingdom, and God gave Jeroboam that kingdom. Can't emphasize that too much. God gave it to him. And he kept his promises to David by giving David's descendants a kingdom, and the Messianic promise continues on. Nothing's happened to the Messianic promise through David, except the kingdom got smaller. Now, keeping your place at Amos, go to 1 Kings 12:25. And I want us to see how the power of political thinking corrupts Jeroboam's faith. Then Jeroboam built Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim and lived there. So he has a royal palace. And he went out from there and built Penuel. And Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom will turn back to the house of David. If this people go up to offer sacrifices in the temple of the Lord at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will turn again to their Lord, to Rehoboam, king of Judah. And they will kill me and return to Rehoboam, king of Judah. Now, how many of us have ever thought, even though God put me in this place, it's my scheming that'll keep me there? So here it is, God has given to him. The God who gave him the kingdom can't keep these people loyal to him just because they go to Jerusalem. He knew that's what the law said, that when they had the festivals 3 times a year, when they offered sacrifice, they were to go to Jerusalem, where the temple was. He said, I'll lose my kingdom if I let my people do what the Bible has said. Verse 28, so crucial to understanding Hosea, Amos, and a whole lot of the Old Testament. So the king took counsel. How do we make a new religion? Made 2 calves of gold. And he said to the people, you have gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Now there was a golden image associated with the Exodus, but it was not a positive one. We are going to rewrite the story. And even though, let's start saying, even though the 10 Commandments said, you shall have no other God before me and no image of me, second command. Well, we're going to have images of God. And we're going to rewrite the Exodus story. Verse 29, he set up one in Bethel, that's in the southern part of his kingdom, and Dan, which is in the north. So we just happen to have 2 major sanctuaries at the borders of Syria in the north and Judah in the south. All under the guise of, it's too much trouble for you to go all the way south to Jerusalem. Verse 30, this thing became a sin, for the people went as far as Dan to be before one. He also made temples on high places and appointed priests from all the people who were not of the Levites. So we're going to democratize the priesthood. Make it easy, more convenient for the people to make it to worship. We're going to call the name of our God the same name as we've always called Him. We are just going to reorder the worship so that God's chosen priest will not be serving. The way God has told the story through Moses of the Exodus, we're not going to continue. We're going to change that. And we're going to have different worship sites. Verse 32, he appointed a feast on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the feast that was in Judah. So we're going to replace that feast with one in our own nation, and he offered sacrifices on the altar at a place in a way God had not ordained. So he did in Bethel, sacrificing before the calves that he made, and he placed in Bethel the priests of the high places that he had made. That'll come up later today. And he went up to the altar that he had made in Bethel on the 15th day in the 8th month, in the month that he had devised from his own heart. Get a little editorial comment there from the writer. He devised it in his own heart, and he instituted a feast for the people of Israel and went up to the altar to make offerings. All right. This occurs between 930 and 909 BC, which is the time that Jeroboam I is king. How does that impact Amos? We're going to have this religion be the state-sponsored religion for 200 years. Now, Baalism does get mixed into it, because you read Elijah and Elisha, they're prophets to the north. You read Hosea, they talks about Baal. Very quickly about Baal. Baal was a Canaanite god. He was considered the god of fertility. Remember, we're in an agricultural community. You need lots of children to be able to work the land. You need lots of animals. You want your animals to be fertile. You want the crops to be fertile. And so, we will worship fertility. And by the way, when you're worshiping fertility in that culture, you're saying basically we're going to worship sex and money, and of course what goes with sex and money? Power. So how do you worship this god? Well, you worship a fertility god by giving money when you have good crop, but you also show your devotion by going and having doing sexual acts with sacred prostitutes, and they had sacred prostitutes men for the women, and they had sacred prostitutes female for the men. And in a twisted way, those sacred prostitutes were kind of nuns in reverse. They're giving their bodies to the God who could do more for their faith. These people are serious. They're not playing at this. They're fully committed to it. And of course, the great patron saint of Baalism was Jezebel. She supported over 400 prophets of Baal out of her own pocket. She's the kind of person you want on your mission committee. Fully committed to Baalism. So you mix all these things in, but we look at this religion, and I call it a perfect storm of false religion, because it doesn't look false. We still say it's Yahweh. We still say God brought us out of Egypt. But we add to that images, we add to that a corrupt priesthood, we link this religion directly to political power in a way the Bible does not sanction in Deuteronomy. The king equals the religion equals the king. So when we read Amos and you talk about a priest at Bethel, remember it's this religion he represents. When you read sacrifices being made regularly, these are not sacrifices that the Lord has sanctioned. These are sacrifices that the people makes of a religion devised out of their own minds. When you read Elijah and Elisha, remember, they are opposing this kind of religion. When you read 1st and 2nd Kings, and it tells you king after king after king, he led the people to sin according to Jeroboam. This is it. So in Israel, you would have had some committed people like Elijah and Elisha who served the Lord the way the Lord wanted. You would have some people worshiping Baal and other gods, and you would have had this kind of religion. Starts to sound like what people do. That's why you can say, some people always say, they blurt out, well, that sounds like America. This is what people do. And so, I mean, it's not an American problem, it's not an Israelite problem, this is a human problem, this is what we do. Meanwhile, because over time, northern Israelite princesses married into the royal line of Judah, this religion got down to Judah too. So, that's in the background for Amos. The other thing about Jeroboam, I think we read yesterday, but take a look at 2 Kings 15, 23 to 29. In the 15th year of Amaziah, the son of Joash, king of Judah, Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel, began to reign, and he reigned 41 years. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He did not depart from all the sin of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, which he made Israel to sin. You now know what that is. He restored the border of Israel from Lebo Hamath, as far as, that's in the north, into Syria, as far as the sea of the Arabah, that's in the south, according to the word of the Lord, the God of Israel, which he spoke by his servant Jonah, the son of Amittai, the prophet, who was from Gath-Hepher. So Jonah, that we know in a different context, had prophesied that God would give them this land, that Jeroboam would succeed. Verse 26, why did God do this? For the Lord saw the affliction of Israel was very bitter, for there was none left, bond or free. There was no one to help Israel. But the Lord had not said that he would blot out the name of Israel from under heaven. Remember Leviticus 26, 40 to 45? God was going to punish. God would even exile, but he would not blot out his people because of his covenant's sake. So he saved them by the hand of Jeroboam, the son of Joash. Now the rest of the acts of Jeroboam and all that he did in his might, how he fought, how he restored Damascus and Hamath, that's in Syria, to Judah in Israel, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? And Jeroboam slept with his fathers, the kings of Israel, and Zechariah's son reigned in his place. During these years that he rules on his own, in 780 to about 750, shaved off a few years, that's his rule. It is clear that there was more money because of why? There was no major nation to cause them political military trouble. The Assyrians had marched near there 800 BC and had stopped, and they were going to march again 745 and beyond, but during this time period, no worries. And Egypt was weak and divided. And Babylon didn't have anything going. And so Israel was able to grow their crops, do their exports. They shipped grain all across the world, from Tyre on off to wherever you could sell grain. They were able to have military victory and defeat some old enemies. Tell me the people wouldn't have thought this was wonderful. And so, as it goes on though, as their religion does not value people and treats material wealth, however you get it, as God's blessing, the poor are seen as objects, as we will see. All against what God said in Leviticus. Worship was doing well. The people had the sacrifices to bring. They had the motivation to bring them. So it looked to them and in their theology as if God was blessing them. Amos was not from their country. And even though we don't know any difference between Israel's Israel to us, there was a real distinction here in their minds. God is sending Amos to do this. And if you turn over to chapter 7, which I'll talk about this afternoon, you'll see that Amos, chapter 7, verse 10, we have this confrontation between Amos and Amaziah, the priest of Bethel. Remember, that's one of the shrines in the south. And as part of the argument, verse 14, Amos answered and said to Amaziah, I was no prophet nor a prophet's son, but I was a herdsman and a dresser of sycamore figs. But the Lord took me from following the flock, and the Lord said to me, go prophesy to my people Israel. A lot of scholars have focused on the fact of he wasn't a prophet or the son of the prophets and talked about there was a professional prophetic class in that time. That's true. Every religion had their priests, their prophets, and their wise men. All of them. He said, I wasn't in that group. And then they say all this rustic, guy came in, in overalls or whatever, and a pitchfork and preached to them. And I don't know about all that. What I do know is what Amos says is, look, I was otherwise occupied, and the Lord in His grace called me to preach to you. And this little phrase, the Lord took me from following the flock, do you know anybody else that sounds like? It's nearly word for word what they said about David in 2 Samuel 7. So David thought that was a tremendous privilege. Amos thinks it's a tremendous privilege, but he said, look, I'm here to help you. But he was otherwise occupied and went to the north to preach. We don't know the length of his ministry. We've heard estimates I've read estimates for several years to only one afternoon. That was his whole ministry. Delivered this book, that was it. Anything's possible. Nothing's known. But God called him to go into this situation. And at this time, what God knew that no king or politician could know, what God knew that he shared through his prophet, was that things were about to change drastically. The nation only had years to survive. Not decades, not centuries, mere years. Because 745 to 727, a new king arises in Assyria. His name is Tiglath-Pileser III. The Tiglath-Pileser built Assyria into a great conquering empire. That is, he wanted to establish other nations that had to, on an ongoing basis, give money to Assyria. Just like the British Empire, the Roman Empire, he was the father of all these oppressive empires. His armies, when they came, were disciplined, were strong, and here was the method. They would send a diplomatic letter or an ambassador to another country and say, we're declaring that you will become our vassal, our servant nation. This is how much you will pay us. If you will pay us, you can keep your king, you can keep your autonomy. Just pay us. If you do not agree to this, we will send our armies into your land. We will destroy your crops. We will devastate your land. We will invade your capital. We will lay siege to it. If you do not surrender, if we breach your walls, we will kill everyone that we desire. We will enslave the rest, and we will enforce our will on you. And they didn't bluff. Tiglath-Pileser had many, many flaws. Lying wasn't one of them. So, when you hear in Amos or any of the prophets that the Assyrians are coming, this is serious, horrific stuff. So that in Joel, if for instance Joel's looking into the future and he says, you know that locust plague we had? Follow that up with an army like this. And in the British Museum, there's a big relief about the size of this wall. It's got artwork on it that the Assyrians made of the destruction of Lachish, which is an Israelite town. And it shows their discipline, it shows their archers, it shows the battle scene, and outside it shows people impaled on sticks, people being boiled in hot liquid, people being taken off into slavery. And it's in all their literature. God sent Hosea, God sent Amos to this nation before this happened. And this is God's kindness. When they did not repent, this became God's judgment. The book of Jonah is evidence that just because judgment is threatened does not mean it's going to happen. If the people repent, it may not be too late. So, in Amos, the book itself is pretty easy to find the structure for. And I don't know about you, but structuring a passage or a book is usually the first thing I try to do in preaching, so I can kind of see, get the flow of it myself and see how many bits I might be able to have and that sort of deal. Amos 1 and 2 is its own unit. What's that about? It's the God who roars against worldwide injustice and hatred. Amos 1 and 2 sounds so much like Romans 1 to 3 to me, I can't help it. We've got worldwide sin. We see that the conscience of the nations is seared. They'll do anything from commit war atrocities against one another, to breaking alliances. They're filled with greed, and they're expanding their territorial borders at the expense of whoever is in their way. They have no conscience about it, in violation of the Noah covenant. But the covenant people, that is, God's Abraham covenant people, have also violated their standards. Judah has ignored God's instruction and believed lies. What is Israel, the focal point? Chapter 2. What have they done? Take a look at chapter 2, verse 6. And as we know from studying this morning, Amos is kind of drawing a noose around it. Probably they had prophets who would stand up and denounce the other nations and everybody get excited and be happy. But then he brings it around to Judah. I wouldn't mind that. But now to Israel. For 3 transgressions of Israel, and for 4 I will not revoke the punishment. They sell the righteous for silver. And the righteous here are those who are right in the court. The not guilty, the innocent, will sell them for silver, and the needy for a pair of sandals. Those who trample the head of the poor into the dust of the earth and turn aside the way of the afflicted. So this is everything from bringing false charges against the poor to get their land, to underpaying them on the wages, to paying bribes to get what you want. They lay themselves down beside every altar. It means there's lots of them. On garments taken in pledge, the poor could give their garment as a equity against a loan, and you weren't supposed to keep it overnight, but they just keep it permanently. So they take the last thing the guy's got. So we got corrupt worship with unjust seizing of garments, then all of a sudden we're lying down in an immoral way. It's just one thing after another. No covenant conscience. And in verses 9 through 11, God reminds him, yet it was I who brought you out of Egypt into the land. You've forgotten your history. You've forgotten who your covenant's with. You've forgotten your God. In mercy, verse 11, he says, I raised up some of your sons for prophets and some of your young men for Nazarites. But you made the Nazarites drink wine. You corrupted somebody who'd made a vow. And you commanded the prophets, don't preach. That's exactly what the high priest of Bethel commands Amos not to do in chapter 7. Stop preaching. Stop preaching against the king's temple. So what's God say He's going to do? He's going to judge them in a series of images through the end of the first chapter. So the first chapter is a series of messages from God with the formula for 3 sins of this group and for 4. Then in chapter 3 to 6, we have Israel's guilt and punishment spelled out in very clear terms. God roars against sin in Amos 1 and 2. In Amos 3 to 6, God warns that He will punish injustice. Now, we have 2 very famous passages, one for women in chapter 4 and one for men in chapter 6. Chapter 3 outlines the guilt and punishment that is awaiting for their sins. But listen to the women. Chapter 4, verse 1. Hear this word, you cows of Bashan. Now, to call a woman today, you fat cow, is not typically taken as a compliment in every culture. Now, it was here though. The cows of Bashan were the best, sleekest, most expensive. It was a compliment in a way. You are the beautiful women. You are the well-fed women. You're on the mountain of Samaria. You oppress the poor, crush the needy, and say to your husbands, bring us the drinks. Keep the money coming. Keep the luxury moving. Do we care how you do it? We do not. Verse 2. The Lord God has sworn by His holiness that, behold, the days are coming upon you when they shall take you away with hooks, even the last of you with fish hooks. Now, most of you probably know what this is. You'll just have to find a gentle way to help your people understand that they are not going fishing. This is not fly fishing. This This is not going for a few big tuna. What the Assyrians did, and other nations probably too, they would take the upper lip of someone they're taking into exile and run a fish hook through it. I doubt there was anesthetic. Just run that thing through. And then you would run a little line with a knot on it, so you'd close it down so that you'd have a line through it so that you could just, it's like a bridle. It's like a bit in a bridle. So you could walk 10 or 15 people like that, just kind of like at a slow pace, right? This is the stark reality of exile, Assyrian style. The activities in verse 1 are leading to the activities in 2. They're coming, and they're even going to worship and showing off their wealth. Come to Bethel and transgress, to Gilgal and multiply transgression. Bring your sacrifice every morning, your tithes every 3 days. The tithes were only required every 3 years. Sacrifices were only on seasonal. Hey, you got the money, do it. Offer a sacrifice of thanksgiving of that which is leavened, it's corrupted. Proclaim free will offerings. Publish them. Let everybody know them. That's what you love to do. Their religion had even gotten down to a place where they showed off their wealth. How about the men? Verse 1 of chapter 6. Woe to those who are at ease in Zion and to those who feel secure on the Mount of Samaria. The notable men, the first of the nations, to whom the house of Israel comes. Woe to those who lie on beds of ivory, ornate, and stretch themselves out on the couches, and eat lambs from the flock, and eat calves from the midst of the stall, who sing idle songs to the sound of the harp, and like David invent for themselves instruments of music. And they drink wine in bowls, not in glasses. Bowls, this is excess. They anoint themselves with the finest oils. Get yourself a nice lotion, have a nice massage. But they don't care about the ruin of Joseph. They have no spiritual conscience whatsoever. They have no national conscience whatsoever, no social conscience whatsoever. And see, they're all connected. Therefore they shall be the first of those who go into exile. The leaders always are. And the revelry, the parties, shall pass away. These are stark, telling images that, again, are human. Women and men still act this way. And we have to seek our own hearts to ask how close that hits home to ourselves. So God's warning of punishment through chapter 6, and then quickly chapters 7:1 to 9:10. God rises against Israel. Warning's over. Visions of coming judgment. Judgment has been set. They have chosen judgment over returning to the Lord. They will get what they ask for. So there are a series of visions demonstrating the severity of future judgment. At this point, somebody might be saying, I thought you said there were gospel principles. What can you see? Well, I can see so far Amos was right with God, but now go to chapter 9. The book doesn't end with disaster. Look at chapter 9 and verse 8. I'm going to go up into the next to last section a bit. Behold, the eyes of the Lord God are upon the sinful kingdom, and I will destroy it from the surface of the ground, except I will not utterly destroy the house of Jacob. That's Leviticus 26. Not going to utterly destroy them. God's covenant will go on. His promises will be kept. For behold, I will command and shake the house of Israel among all the nations as one shakes with a sieve, but no pebble shall fall to the earth. None of them going to escape. All the sinners of my people shall die by the sword, who say disaster shall not overtake or meet us. How does the book end, though? In that day, future day, I will raise up the booth of David that is fallen, and repair its breaches, and raise up its ruins, and rebuild it as in the days of old. The key to Israel's future is through the Davidic dynasty. And over again, the prophets talk about how the son of David will unite the 12 tribes again, and God will replant them in the land, and He will bless them, and the Messiah will come to them. Verse 12, that they may possess the remnant of Edom and all the nations that are called by my name, declares the Lord who does this. You remember Acts 15 interprets this as the gospel going to the nations, as God rebuilding the tent. So James says, I think I see what's going on here. God is bringing the nations into the tent of David. It's a spiritual kingdom, just like Jesus said it was. My kingdom is not of this world. Don't worry, Pilate. But He does have a kingdom, and people are coming into it. And to conclude, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when the plowman shall overtake the reaper, the treader of grapes, him who sows the seed. Can't plant it fast enough. Can't gather it fast enough. Time to plant again. This just warms an old farmer's heart. The mountain shall drip sweet wine, the hills shall flow with it. I will restore the fortunes of my people Israel. They shall rebuild the ruined cities, inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and drink their wine. They shall make gardens and eat at their fruit. I will plant them on their land. They shall never be uprooted out of the land that I've given them, says the Lord your God. Strong poetic imagery of a perfect place. It's new creation. That's what Isaiah calls it. New creation. So, because no matter how you cut it, no matter how nice your property is, you never have this kind of harvest. You just don't. This is an ideal world. So, to end this, when you're preaching, you're always taking people from sin with a warning of judgment, with the possibility of renewal, through returning to God, and with a focus on the Davidic lineage. We've been talking about how to divide this book, but this is the thrust of the message with the historical background in mind. And I think you'll be able to see in your own context how best to divide this, how best to share it and do some of these things.